Hello, I'm Wolfram Alderson, and I'm a lifelong social change agent and artist. I'm also the son of a writer and a poet who made her living as a journalist in advertising and PR, but was mostly unpublished. And today I'm here with Lyn Coffin, who has been described as the most accomplished writer most Americans have never heard of. Her Wikipedia page indicates that she's an author of 30 books of poetry, fiction, drama, nonfiction, and translation. And Lyn, while some of us might be slowing down in our later years, you seem to be speeding up, and you're heading for Spain
I
this
am in
month
August, yeah.
to celebrate your publication in Spanish of This Green Life, new and collected poems. Then from there, which I think you're at the Soria International Poetry Festival.
Right, I think it's pronounced Soria, but I don't know.
Soria. And then you're headed to Paris for a reading, and then to London for another reading.
Right.
And then,
Paris, I'm not sure about Paris. I'm crossing my fingers, but London definitely.
then in the fall, you're headed to the Frankfurt International Book Fair.
Correct.
We're going to talk about your award-winning translation of The Knight in the Panther Skin, a 12th century epic by Shota Rustaveli,
Right.
Georgia, one of Georgia nation's major literary figures.
So,
This is
the major figure.
the major figure. He's the man.
Man, he's the one. They all know. Actually, they teach him in school. Children have to memorize huge portions. I've met people who have memorized the whole of The Knight in the Panther Skin, which is 1,661 quatrains long, and they give the book as a dowry to brides. I think that's pretty cool.
Wow,
So every bride, when she gets married, has to have a copy of The Knight in the Panther Skin.
That's amazing. And you translated this epic poem by this epic poet in the same poetic form that it was written, which makes your translation different than other translations which have taken a more academic or literal route, meaning translate literally versus poetically.
Well, I would say actually it's probably, I take pride in the fact that it's more accurate than the so-called literal translations. I think they're prosaic translations. They're not necessarily, I don't think they're any more accurate. In fact, I think our translation, my translation, is more accurate than previous translations, but it's done in poetic form.
But essentially you wrote in the same form that he
Right,
wrote.
exactly.
And then it won the Georgia Saba Prize in 2016.
Correct.
I have to say the book is just beautiful. It's a work of art in itself. It's just a gorgeous book. It's kind of those books you pick up. It's got a wonderful weight to it. It's it's beautifully illustrated and very well done.
Yeah, great. What I really like is it's got the ribbon to mark your place. I haven't seen one of those for years, but it does have this wonderful ribbon.
I love that too. And I think for book lovers, it's something you appreciate. And then you're celebrating a new publication of another Georgian great, Galactian.
Right.
Right.
Galactian Tabidze.
Galactian Tabidze. Right. And that will be published by Poesia Press in October, correct?
That's correct, right. Hopefully in time for the Frankfurt Book Fair.
Great. And then in November, you're publishing, in your spare time, you're publishing your first novel, The Aftermath, by Transcendent Zero Press.
Right.
The novel is in the Me Too ballpark, as you have said, and you plan to meet with women around the Pacific Northwest, and I imagine in other parts, given your proclivity for global travels. And obviously the theme, which essentially is built around a quote-unquote date rape by 2 U.S. Marshals and the aftermath of what happens next.
Right. And I should say, what I think will attract readers is it starts about as grimly as any novel, I think, has started in recent times, which is pretty grim. But by the end of the novel, there are there are switchbacks, twists, and turns. But by the end of the novel, I think there's a kind of happiness there, a kind of wholeness, which the heroine pulls out of the fire, so to speak.
Well, it certainly is a story of the times, and so I just want to say, I'm really inspired by your example. If I have half your creativity and brain cells firing when I reach your age, and you're not very far ahead of me, but still, I'm inspired by
I'm
you.
way ahead of you. You get to our age, every year it's like you're just a youngin. You're a youngin.
Well, I was trying to.
I
I
know.
just didn't want to overemphasize the distance in our years because I feel close to you and
Right. Well, I appreciate that, Wolfram, and I can't wait to. I know that your first novel will be out in the next year or so, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in print.
Thank you. Well, yes, like I said, I'm just working on my first book, and Lord knows how many books you'll have published by the time I get that one out. But anyway, we're going to talk about your book, The First Honeymoon, today, a collection of 17 stories.
Happen to have it right here.
Good, I have it right here too.
Great.
This was published in 2015, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm terrible about dates, but I think that's correct.
And it features stories such as an artichoke revealing to a young bride the fault lines that are dooming her marriage. A mother makes final amends for telling an unwelcome truth about Christmas by telling a comforting lie about death. A young girl navigates the madness of her mother, the possible evil of her father, and questions about her own state of mind. And a retelling of the classic tortoise and hare fable, recently re-released as a series of tweets. To quote, "These fictions cross boundaries. They are funny, ominous, and heartbreakingly true."
That's from the cover, right?
Yeah. So, of course, we want to know how did this book come about, and was there a single inspiration you can share? Just help us understand the origin story. And I'm going to switch to just view you on the screen.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I think that the origins, these stories, many of them were published before in various magazines, and it was the inspiration of the publisher, Iron Twine Press, which is essentially Ethan, and now I forget his last name, but Ethan Yarborough, who wanted to put them together and publish them. And he had been a student of mine at the University of Washington, and I don't think that I use these stories in class. It's always a dicey thing, how many of can you use your own works with a creative writing class or not? I don't think I did, but he looked them up. Some of them were online. One of the things that's interesting to me is he put a story, Counting the Wounds, which I'm not sure even survived into the book, but it was as a single on Amazon, and it did pretty well. It was the top selling single for a while, and that was very exciting until the next new single came out and it plunged back into the depths. But anyway, he said, well, there's a readership out there, obviously, so let's put together a collection of the stories and see. And the anchor, I suppose, would be one of the stories in this was published in Best American Short Stories, chosen by Joyce Carol Oates. And I had the pleasure of meeting her, and she and I talked about the story. She was very complimentary. And so decades ago, it was published in Best American Short Stories. That also seemed to be a kind of an anchor for the book.
Well, she described your story as falling off the scaffold, as having no characters at all, only the projected personas of the two people unknown to each other, yet respecting the contours of reality and giving us the most unusual form, a story about illusion and self-deception.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, she said no characters at all, and I guess that's right. But it's an epistolary story. It's a story told in letters by someone who writes to an advertised writing teacher. So, and says, I want to be in your online or your correspondence course. And they start this correspondence, but all you have is the words of each person in turn, and you have no verification from the outside world. So you definitely have two characters. They have different voices and different responses, but you don't know, and you don't know the truth of their life. You just have to accept what they say. And they both begin to sound like very unreliable narrators. And one of the themes in the story is about gender. So they're each trying to guess each other's gender. And at the end, the writing teacher thinks that he or she has guessed successfully the gender of the writing student, and then the writing student says, no, you're wrong. So there's gender, and then the stories. So there are many stories within that story, the stories that the writing student sends to the teacher and the teacher's comments.
Well, it's a fascinating structure, and of course it relates a lot to, of course, to what's going on today in the world, where we have, I have many friends on Facebook and in social media who I actually know in real life, but then I literally have thousands and thousands of friends around the world who I've never met.
Right.
We only know each other as, we're not writing letters back and forth, but we only know each other in this virtual world. So it's a really interesting story structure.
What I think of, one little diversion here, I had a friend, a male friend I was very close with, and I thought we were going to, waltz off into the sunset together. And then I was on Facebook and I saw one of his friends, and we were in a chat room, and I said, oh, can you tell me anything about, let's call him Eric, which is not his name. Can you tell me anything about Eric? And she said, actually, I thought she'd say, he loves blackberry pie in the morning with chocolate ice cream or some quirky little thing that I would then serve him blackberry pie. And she said, actually, I don't know him at all. I've never met him. I'm just a Facebook friend, so I don't know. And then when he found out that I had been chatting with this woman, he discontinued our relationship because he was so frightened or so angry about this chatting about him. And I said, but she doesn't even know you. So, anyway, I just, it's amazing to me. So we have the unreality of it on our Facebook, that we're chatting about this thing, and then the sort of reality for him that things could happen and people could track him down or something.
Well, I think, again, it's definitely very emblematic of just this world of social media and this virtual world that many of us increasingly live in. There was just an article I read about gaming addiction, and just how people just really get completely lost in this online world. So I think for me, that you as a writer are navigating this space, and I don't know if you're making sense out of it, but you are making sense, in that you're telling stories in this world, and stories that mean something, because of course a lot of social media is meaningless.
Right.
And so that's another reason why I appreciate the fact that from this book you converted the tortoise and the hare fable to your own version or short story, but then you've also created a series of tweebles, a hybrid of tweets, fables, and poetry. So what inspires you to convey your work or try to talk about your work on social media? I mean, obviously you'd love to sell your books, and that, every writer, perhaps contrary to what people might believe, writers don't have some magical pot of gold that sustains them. They actually do have to sell their works to live. So, but what inspired you to do the Tweeble series?
Well, I think you, among others, you introduced me. I was on Twitter, but I didn't really understand what tweets were or what Twitter was about. I put out a few tweets, and then I was looking for small pieces of writing that would be interesting in themselves, as well as lead to some larger message. And the tortoise and the hare fable has, as you know, a moral for every line. And it was just, I remember writing that story, I was playing around with the idea, how far can you go? Because for us, the idea that Aesop, for example, would conclude all his stories with a moral it's very anti-modern. We think stories don't have morals at all. So I thought, what about if I thought about every line as needing to have a moral? And then I got, even more carried away. And so even my name has a moral, and even the end has a moral. So everything has a moral. And it was just encouraging people to look at fiction in another way and see that there are judgments and morals buried in pretty much every line of every story ever written, but we don't focus on that because we're carried away by the narrative.
Well, it's fascinating because obviously there's some characters, well-known characters in national media who use Twitter who have no morals at all, but
Exactly.
we won't politicize this conversation.
No, let's not do that.
Yeah,
I had I don't know, I just wanted to tell the most recent story that I've heard, and you asked where ideas come from. So this is the latest idea. It's not a story yet, but it's percolating in my mind the way ideas do that may eventually become stories. And it's about Diogenes meeting Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great was an admirer of Diogenes, the cynic who ran around in a barrel and was, very iconoclastic. And Alexander the Great said to Diogenes, if I weren't Alexander the Great, I would like to be Diogenes. And Diogenes says, well, that's interesting. Me too. If I weren't Diogenes, I would like to be Diogenes. And I love that because you expect him to say, I'd like to be Alexander the Great, but no, he'd like to be himself. And so that's a genesis of a story, like something that somebody might tell at a party that would illustrate what's going on with them.
Well, I was hoping you might be willing to read a short piece from the book. I happen to love The Butterfly, but you can read whatever you like. I think
Okay.
The Butterfly is just 2 pages, but like I said, you're the author. You can pick your own favorite.
I would be happy to read The Butterfly if I can find it here. It's at page 63. Let's see.
Yes, page 63.
Okay, so this is The Butterfly. A woman sat in a clearing on a bright spring day. She was in the woods, in a clearing, in nature, in the freedom halfway between presence and absence. She sat not far from a stream, amid swaying grasses, feeling the breezes, listening to the birds around her sing the incidental music at the heart of silent happenings. This was a sacred space, and she was free to come and go. It was a place she knew, a place that knew her, a place that was always different and the same. He had asked her what she wanted, and she said, intimacy. She meant free being together in the openness of a world that began as an expression of love and freedom. But speech was treacherous, and meaning was the narrowest part of significance. When she said intimacy, he had seen greenhouses, plants being tricked and trained into loveliness. He had seen glass walls and hot, wet air, focused lights and soil in plastic bags. He had seen schedules and expenses and all the mechanisms of managed growth. She sat in the woods, letting the sun tell time, open to the light, to the shade, to the stream that wandered past her, and the west wind that played with her hair, and the woods and meadows that stood their ground. She was a creature among other creatures, single but not alone, strong and delicate, free in the wideness and the wildness of God's mercy. And as she was sitting there quietly, a white butterfly came and flickered in the air around her. Slowly, she extended her hand, palm up, in invitation. And after a moment, the butterfly fluttered down to the heart of her open hand and rested there for a moment. For a moment, lighter and briefer and clearer than words, there was touch. There was connection. Then he flew away, as butterflies do, to resume his beautiful, tremulous journey. She knew better than to chase a creature with wings and let him go. She got up and walked leisurely home. She felt happy, she felt loving, she felt hopeful. The world was full of gifts and possibilities. Even now, he might be calling, the one she felt drawn to in spirit and truth. Not like a moth is drawn to a flame, more like a white butterfly responding to the invitation of a perfectly open hand.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I mean, I would buy the book just for that one story.
Well,
of course, many great stories in the book, but I actually have had an experience that, to me, that conjured up that experience very vividly. And my mother, as I mentioned, was a poet, and she focused often on this idea of moments of magic and places of rescue. And that poem just conjures that idea up very powerfully. And so anyway, it just really resonated with me, and it's just beautiful. It's just 2 pages, and it's just it's a very visual but also inspiring piece. So thank you.
Well, thank you. One thing that interests me in my, I belong to a poetry group, and one of the things that I notice is that most of the people in the group write poems from their own perspective. That's what interests them, and they write autobiographical poems. And people talk about the narrator in the poem as the poet, and they will say, well, when you this and you that. And it occurred to me when I was looking at this the other day, this collection of stories, some of them are quite autobiographical. Others of them came out of the air, have nothing to do with the specifics, with the facts of my life. Had to do with my imagining other lives or other beings or other characters. And I suppose that comes from my work as an actor. But I think that, like, I've written stories and poems from the viewpoint of a pork chop or a refrigerator. That's about as different as you can get, I think. I don't think anybody would confuse me with a pork chop. So, that's one of the things that I think is to look at in this book is some of them, like this butterfly came to me as an image, like you said, like an imagining. There was I've had moments of connection with animals, but they've been with like raccoons, not with butterflies. So I don't know where that came from.
Well, an artichoke found a voice in your book as well. And the image of beautiful image of an artichoke flayed as a flower on the cover of the book. You can hold that up so people can see what.
Yeah, it's really, I like this cover design. Yeah, a lot. And it was done by an ex-student of mine whose name I can't recall now. Mariana Jasso, who's a graphic artist in Seattle. She worked a long time to get the artichoke just right.
It's a beautiful image. But the story with the artichoke, of course, is the sort of the namesake for the story for the book, right?
Right, the first honeymoon. And that was autobiographical. I was traveling, that part of it, the artichoke was autobiographical. I was traveling with my husband in France and came to this old restaurant. And I had the habit then when I ate artichokes of taking each leaf and then making a spiral around the heart of the artichoke. And it did look something like this. I took the leaves, and then you see in the center the base of the artichoke. And when the maitre d' saw what I had done, he comped our whole meal. I thought only a Frenchman would do that. He was so struck by the beauty of it. He brought all the kitchen help out to look at this plate, and he said, "Your meal is free."
Well, that's beautiful. I mean, artichoke is my favorite vegetable. And I don't have the patience to, even though I'm an artist and I love visual displays, when I get an artichoke in front of me, I just start yanking those leaves off and dipping in lemon butter. So
right. Well, I had artichoke last weekend with my daughter, and my plate, I ate 2 artichokes in rapid succession, and my plate looked like a battlefield. It was a horrible mound, and I thought of this story. So I think having done that and written the story about it, now I feel released to just keep everything on the plate.
Well, a lot of your stories are like the artichoke or, the onion, the classic metaphor where you keep peeling back layers and layers, but then you get to the heart of the story. And I know that was something I shared with my mom, both the love of artichokes, but I think we, as artists, you inherently see the story even in an artichoke.
That's great.
And of course, it's a thistle, and you can prick yourself on the needles. There's pain, and then there's heart, there's love at the center, and then all these amazing, nourishment in between. But you have to work for it and literally, grind that stuff off the leaves with your teeth. And anyway, it's just a wonderful metaphor. Can you describe that story a little bit? I mean, you talked about the artichoke, but maybe describe the story that is the namesake for the book.
Well, it's about a couple. I think this story is partly conveyed in the title. This is both of them married for the first time, but we know from the title that they're probably going to get married, divorce, and marry other people. So this is not going to last, because you wouldn't say the first if it was the only one.
Right.
And so then it's exploring the tensions between the couple, which come out in terms of the restaurant and in terms of the French people. This was not autobiographical, but the husband in the story keeps wanting to know, he keeps wanting to pay. He's an American, he wants to know how much everything costs, and he wants to pay it. And he's in a way offended by the meal being free. I mean, you don't do that. Why? How can you comp a meal because somebody arranged an artichoke? That's just an offense to his whole way of being. So it's about that. But one thing I wanted to say is, I'm glad you talked about the heart of the story being revealed. I'm, I guess, proudest of the story called The Gift Horse, which is about a woman dying. And at the end of the story ends after her death, which is really hard to achieve. And I was inspired by The Snows of Kilimanjaro, by Hemingway's story, when the man dies clearly, and at the end of the story you go beyond the death. And so that's what I was trying to do there, and I think I was pretty successful in doing that. And sometimes the heart of the story is only revealed after the main character has died. So that I'm particularly interested in people's reaction to the end of that story.
Is there any other part of the book that you want to share or read, or?
Well, I can read a little bit of the Gift Horse, just the beginning, knowing that it's going to end after her death. This was a sort of a gifted story. A lot of this just came to me, and it's about a woman going out for the last time by herself. She's getting weaker. She has cancer, and it's about her relationship with her young daughter, her 7-year-old daughter, whose name is Leah. And I'll just tell a little quote from the mother talking to the daughter right at the beginning of the story. "Leah," she began, "suppose you were grown up and had a daughter, and you loved the daughter very much, the way I love you. And let's suppose your daughter believed something, and this something made her happy but wasn't true. Would you tell your daughter the truth? Or would you let her go on believing in the thing that wasn't true but made her happy?" And that's the central, as you said, the conundrum of the story is that the little girl believes in Santa Claus, and the mother feels very uncomfortable. I mean, we all think, isn't this cute and charming? But with my 2 sons, I did this without any qualms whatsoever. But with my daughter, who came last, it suddenly occurred to me that, I'm encouraging her to believe in something. Okay, I can say it's a fiction and not a lie, but to her it was truth. And she's believing that this guy in a red suit comes at Christmas and drops off presents and so forth. And I know that's not true. So, but I didn't want to just, say, no, Santa Claus does not exist. That's the end. I was remembering that essay about Virginia, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. And so I asked her that question, and she, like the girl in the story, she says that she would want to know the truth. And so I told her, this was way before Christmas, like in September. And I told her that Santa Claus didn't exist, and she was quite upset. And, I tried my best to comfort her. And then I felt like, oh, now I made a really bad mistake in telling her the truth. But anyway, in the story, this works out, as you say, the sort of compensation for that uncomfortable truth. It's talking about lies and how sometimes falsehoods or lies or wishes can be made true. Anyway, you kind of have to read the story, but I think it's one of my best, and I think part of it is the key image, the gift horse, is of something I completely imagined. This horse with its mouth open, and its insides are painted kind of Pepto-Bismol pink, and there's a whole landscape and so forth inside the horse. And ever since, I've been looking for the the gift horse. So if you ever see a horse with a pink mouth, please please send it to me.
I'll do that.
Okay.
And if we want to reach out to you, we can go to your website, lyncoffin.com.
True.
Of course, your book is available on Amazon in both the first Honeymoon as well as other books on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback versions.
Right.
And so we're almost finished. Just want to say, it's a delight to discover your work, and hopefully we can change that that quote from the most accomplished writer you've never heard of to the most accomplished writer you have heard of.
That would be very wonderful. Yeah.
Of course, you have, you're on social media, you have Facebook and Twitter. Those are all linked on your website, lyncoffin.com. And we encourage people to sustain the arts and the artists and the poets by actually buying their work, even though so much of it is available free on the internet, and you're certainly contributing to that cause. There's a number of series that you've launched both on Twitter and Facebook to share your work and make it more accessible to everyone. But we want everybody to keep reading books before somebody starts burning them. Again, I'm not going to make this political, but it's so important today to read books and to also get to know authors and poets and writers like you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just want to say, you ask about ideas, and one idea that came to me just now as an idea for a collection, for a fiction collection that I'd like to do in the future, is a collection of stories with poems and possibly plays that treat the same subject in different genres. I've done this a few times, and that idea really interests me, of how an author trying to stick as close as possible to the genius of the story, the gem of the story, how it would be changed just by being a poem or by being a play instead of fiction. So you've given me an idea for my next collection of fiction.
Well, this is our second interview in what is going to be a series. So we'll be continuing to talk to you about your other books and publications and travels.
Great.
And, ideas for your next book. I'm sure people are really interested. And right now they just saw a book or something just born right in front of them.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for being the godfather to that idea.
All right. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you, Wolfram. Have a good day.